Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweiler. Tonight is the first night of March 1st, 2016. As always, you can stay up to date with us on our website, www.arh.noaa.gov. That's Alaska Regional Headquarters is the ARH. Our weather info line is 1-800-472-0391. You can call that 24/7. You can also find us on Facebook. NWS Alaska will give you the entire state of Alaska, all 3 WFOs, and some extra Alaska weather information. You can also find us on Twitter at NWS Alaska and use the hashtag AKwx to get a regional perspective from all those that are reporting any weather or discussing weather. And then on YouTube, you can find this show and a few other segments later on this evening using again, the hashtag AKwxTV this time. So let's jump right into it. We have a relatively quiet pattern for those that have been keeping an eye on things. Things have been relatively quiet throughout much of the state, especially for the early portion of March, latter portion of February. Let's go ahead and put our IR satellite loop into motion. And you can see here out over the western and central portion of the Aleutian Islands, fairly large counterclockwise swirl. And this is our area of low pressure that's pretty much driving weather from the west coast all the way out towards the western Aleutians. And that swirl is bringing some warmer air up to the southern half of the Aleutians, the southeastern side of the Alaska Peninsula, where we see some warm air bringing some rain showers, and then coming around the backside is where we finally see some colder air helping to make that rain mix over to snow and eventually become all snow. As we get a little bit towards the mainland, you can see here, put the loop in motion again, we have fairly quiet weather, just a weak trough of low pressure kind of stretching up from the Gulf of Alaska over into the Aleutian and Alaska range there, and really not seeing a whole lot of precipitation from this feature. Up over the Arctic coast, we do have an area of high pressure that is helping to create some strong easterly winds, and that is being pinched off by another area of high pressure over the southern portion of the state that's starting to build. And so with that, some strong easterly flow bringing some blowing snow conditions to portions of the northwest portion of the state. As we get towards southeast Alaska, things have been relatively quiet there as well. Some weak offshore flow helping to keep skies mostly clear. And you can see our stronger area of low pressure down over the Pacific Northwestern portion of the lower 48. And that's really where most of the weather is going to stay. Let's take a look at our satellite loop one more time. You can see again, all that moisture really kind of starting to fizzle out as it gets towards the southern portion of the state. Clear skies across southeast Alaska. And again, we can see some of that rotation starting to develop around this area of high pressure where the clouds start to dissipate as that starts to set up and dry things out. So taking a look at today's weather map, you can see our area of low pressure that we saw on the satellite there at 978 millibars. And again, that's helping to bring some light rain showers to the Pacific side of the Aleutian range and the Alaska Peninsula. As it comes around the backside of this, it starts to change over to a little bit of a rain-snow mix, and then eventually some light snow showers out towards Shemya and Attu. Over south central, that's where we have our area of high pressure at 1,016 millibars. This area of high pressure will continue to build this afternoon and into the overnight hours. And so these clouds that have been lingering in the upper levels of the atmosphere and some mid-level clouds should start to continue to dissipate through the overnight hours. Up over the northwest portion of the state and the northern Arctic coast is where we see our most active weather in the state right now. And that's just, again, because of this very strong area of high pressure. 1,042 is about as strong as they come. And with that, it's creating a fairly strong easterly flow over the the Brooks Range there and off offshore into the Bering Strait. And so with that, we do have some pockets of blowing snow, some light snow being mixed in, and some patchy fog, reducing visibilities down to as low as a quarter-mile reported this afternoon. As we get towards southeast Alaska, again, we can see just a weak area of lower pressure bringing some clouds, but that is starting to dissipate as well as this area of high pressure moves in, and a weak trough just representing a little bit of a difference in temperature from the Gulf, where the waters are a little bit warmer, towards the mainland, where things are just slightly cooler. So we call that a thermal trough there over the Gulf, and it's really just affecting winds for the marine zones and maybe a little bit winds for the outflow conditions near the coastlines. But otherwise, relatively quiet weather for southeast Alaska as well. So as we get into tonight's forecast, we can see our area of low pressure here at 982 millibars. And again, that's going to continue to spin some rain and snow mix through the central Aleutians, mainly just west of Dutch Harbor as we get into the overnight hours. And then as it comes around the backside of this trough, we see that rain start to change over to all snow. A weak system in the North Pacific trying to clip the Aleutians, but that's going to stay south of our area. And then as we get towards the mainland and southeast Alaska, we can see our area of high pressure that it will continue to build to 1,019 millibars overnight tonight. With that, we could see some patchy fog develop in areas that have open waters, such as the Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound. We could see some patchy fog and just a chance for a light shower, maybe mixing with some snow over mainly the Prince William side, Gulf side of the Kenai Peninsula, the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula. Over the Arctic coast, again, we do expect pockets of patchy fog and some isolated snow showers. And those strong easterly winds should start to dissipate just a little bit as we go into the overnight hours, but that gradient will remain fairly tight up there with a 1,041 millibar high. And then on over the Gulf, we do have some light rain courtesy of this trough that's just going to remain offshore and start to work its way back towards the west. And most of the active weather, again, remains down to our south and southeast of the Panhandle over the portions of British Columbia. On into Wednesday now, our area of low pressure continues to maintain its strength at about 985, but again, not expecting any real significant impacts from this system. Mainly a rain-snow mix for the Aleutians and starting to creep towards the Alaska Peninsula, and then some snow wrapping around the backside of it there as you get towards the Bering Strait. Out over the Arctic coast, we do continue to see those snow showers and patchy fog, reducing visibility up there, and that will really be the case all the way through Wednesday, but things should continue to improve as they start to see that high pressure build in, as it will over much of the mainland. And then just some light cloud cover here in south central and southern Alaska, as we expect that fog to lift relatively quickly as this high will start to push stronger winds off into the Gulf of Alaska. With that, we do expect the outflow winds through places like Whittier, Seward, Thompson Pass to start to creep up into the afternoon hours on Wednesday, and that really should get rid of any fog and low clouds that might be plaguing south central. Southeast Alaska, another beautiful day on tap for you as much of the action in the weather world stays south of the Gulf of Alaska. Then on Thursday, not a whole lot of change in the pattern. The biggest thing to notice is that this area of low pressure continues to work its way back to the west as high pressure from the mainland starts to push through southwest Alaska, and that's going to dry things out very nicely for southwest Alaska, bring temps a little bit more towards the seasonable levels, a little bit more on the cooler side than what we've been seeing with that strong southerly flow. Then as we look towards our Gulf of Alaska system, we are starting to see this drift just ever so slightly towards the Gulf at 965 millibars. Can stamp the low on there now, and with that we'll start to see some southeasterly flow bringing some rain and warmer temperatures to southeast Alaska. Out over the more northern portion of the state, we start to see our area of high pressure start to dissipate and move off to southwest Alaska, and so with that we expect a few weak areas of low pressure and troughiness to start to move through, bringing some more snow showers to areas along the Alaska Range and Brooks Range. Taking a look at our temperatures now, you can see for southeast Alaska we had highs this afternoon at 4 p.m. mainly in the mid to lower 40s, much of the area there right around the mid 40 range. Towards south central Alaska, 45 degrees there at Cordova, 43 at Middleton Island. Anchorage came in at 41 degrees at 4 p.m. and Galcana climbed up to 19 degrees with Talkeetna at 36 degrees. Taking a look towards the northern portion of the state now, Fairbanks was almost at freezing at 31 degrees. Much of the Brooks Range right in the lower 20s to upper teens. And then as we move to the Arctic coast, we see some single digits and some just below zero numbers up there. Towards the Seward Peninsula, we saw temperatures mainly in the teens for highs this afternoon, with Nome coming in at 31 degrees. Taking a look down towards southwest Alaska, Bethel reported 39 degrees at 4 p.m. Dillingham was 40 degrees and King Salmon was 45 degrees. And then as we stretch out along the the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutian Chain, low 40 degrees for the highs there, and St. Paul came in at 40, Dutch Harbor was 38, and Shimmy out west was 34 degrees. So for tonight's low temperatures, going to see a little bit of a cooling trend as skies start to clear over much of southern Alaska and southeast Alaska. We'll see lows mainly in the low 30s to upper 20s for southeast Alaska, except for Chilkoot and White Pass. We'll expect about 19 degrees there. And as we get towards south central, temperatures will be in the low 20s. East Anchorage will be the coldest for the Anchorage Bowl area. And then up towards much of the interior portion of the state, expect temperatures in the single digits overnight with just about -5 to -10 along the Arctic coast. For southwest Alaska, you can expect temperatures anywhere between about 20 and 30 degrees for the overnight low. And for northwest Alaska, single digits to the lower teens up there. For much of the Aleutian chain, expect temperatures in the mid to upper 30s tonight. And jumping into tomorrow's high temperatures, expect abundant sunshine through southeast Alaska to help things warm into the lower to mid 40s. For south central, we'll see a very similar day to today with temperatures maybe just a few degrees warmer under some March sunshine, with temperatures expected in the mid to upper 30s. For much of the interior, we expect mainly mid 20s, and then once you get north of the north of the Brooks Range, you'll expect temperatures just in the single digits for highs. Seward Peninsula will see things from about 20 to 30 degrees for highs on Wednesday, and southwest Alaska you can expect 30 to 40 degrees for your highs as well. So taking a look at tomorrow's flying weather, going to be a fairly nice day across much of the region. As you can see here, nothing really noted across southeast or south central Alaska, so pretty quiet weather with that light offshore flow. Could see some bumps in localized places, but we'll talk about that here in a second with turbulence. So mainly MVFR conditions where that southeasterly flow hits the Alaska Peninsula, helping to create a little bit of upslope flow there. And otherwise just associated with those pockets of blowing snow and patchy fog with those gusty easterly winds coming there through the northern portion of the Brooks Range. And then MVFR conditions around that low centered out over the western and central Aleutians. So taking a look at our passes now, we do expect, because of that blowing snow and the potential for fog, Anaktuvik will remain MVFR through much of the day. Same thing for Adigan, same conditions up there. For Lake Clark and Merrill, we do expect VFR conditions. Rainy VFR as well. Windy will also be VFR. And Isabel, we'll probably see some light fog and maybe some low stratus develop up in the Isabel and Copper River Basin. So we'll expect MVFR improving to VFR. Same situation for Mentasta, some patchy fog developing up in the Copper River Basin. Tanita, we'll see IFR becoming VFR. We do expect a little bit better chance for fog to develop there, but again, with offshore flow developing on Wednesday, that should burn off and become visual flight rules. Portage will be visual flight rules throughout the entirety of the day, and Chilkoot and White with offshore flow should be quite nice. Looking at our freezing levels now, no surprise, our surface line continues to hug right along the coast of south central, along the Gulf Coast here, extending into southeast with 2,000 foot freezing levels as you get a little bit warmer over the Gulf, and then finally up to 4,000 feet as you get towards the Dixon entrance and a little bit farther southeast. Now looking at our icing charts for tomorrow, up towards the Bering Strait there where we have a little bit better cold air advection coming off from the east, we do expect a fairly wide area of light to isolated moderate below 6,000 feet. And then again where we have that southeasterly flow bringing slightly warmer temperatures, light to isolated moderate below 5,000 feet near Dutch Harbor and Cold Bay. And then on the back side of that system below 4,000 feet, light isolated moderate. Now looking at our jet stream, you can see here the active jet is really screaming along at 180 knots. That's a pretty potent jet, especially for early March. And we'll expect that to continue to remain south of our area. It's very much a west-east oriented jet, and it's going to remain over the North Pacific and south of our area. We've seen some very impressive systems developing along this jet, but however, they are all remaining well south of the state of Alaska and even south of the Aleutian Range. We do have a little bit of a split flow here is what we call this, so expect some development in this area, and that's what we talked about on those surface charts. We'll see a low develop here later on in the week as the atmosphere is basically becoming a vent at the top of the atmosphere, and with that it allows for rising motion underneath that vent and helps to develop areas of lower pressure near the surface. Weak finger of the jet at about 70 knots, not really going to have a big impact on any weather up towards the state, and then our area of high pressure north of the state, keeping the jet stream well to the north of the Arctic coast, and then high pressure over the lower 48, helping the jet to ride up and over that for northwestern CONUS as well. So our 9,000-foot winds really coming over top of this low pressure system at about 55 to anywhere up to 15 knots. Again, strongest winds are going to remain well south towards the southern portions of the Gulf, becoming more southerly as you go towards the Aleutians and up into the Bering, and then a counterclockwise flow around this area of low pressure at about 40 knots out over the western portion of the Bering. Fairly quiet conditions for much of the mainland and much of western Canada, with less than 5 knots of wind expected at 9,000 feet. Similar wind pattern will remain at about 3,000 feet, from 55 knots all the way down to 20 knots as you get a little bit towards Kodiak Island, and then again becoming southerly and eventually east and northeast around this area of low pressure out over the western Aleutians. And finally, our turbulence chart for aviation. We'll see the strongest areas of turbulence, best chance for turbulence, occasional widespread moderate below 10,000 and below 5,000 feet out over the southeastern portion of the Gulf and creeping towards Dixon Entrance, but not quite making that far north. And then out over the portions of the Aleutian Range and Alaska Peninsula below 4,000 feet, and then out over the Bering below 7,000 feet, light to isolated moderate. Stay with us. We'll be right back with your marine forecast.
The reality is that snowpack's stable about 90% of the time. And that's where timing comes in, is recognizing that other 10% of the time when the snowpack is unstable. If you're skiing the same way 100% of the time, 1 out of 10 times you're going to get into trouble. But if you have the skills to recognize those unstable periods, that other 10% of the time, then you're going to be able to ski safely 100% of the time.
The ultimate question is, will the slope slide? The answer is that any slope can slide. It depends on the amount of force applied to it. For instance, on a very stable snowpack where a skier is perfectly safe, the fall of a large cornice might be enough force to trigger an avalanche. As snow becomes less stable, a skier might barely get down safely, while on the same slope, a medium-sized cornice might trigger an avalanche. In the next step up the instability scale, both a cornice and a skier may trigger an avalanche, but if left undisturbed, the snowpack could remain in place indefinitely. Finally, at the top of the instability scale, natural spontaneous avalanches begin to occur, and this, of course, is the most obvious sign of instability.
I mean, if you see an avalanche come down, it's pretty obvious that you've got an unstable situation. Although we say it's obvious, you'd be surprised how some people manage to avoid the obvious by overlooking this.
The problem that you're faced with when you're traveling in the backcountry is one of uncertainty. And you really have two choices. One is that you can just charge blindly ahead, and that would be similar to finding the busiest street in a town that you lived in and going across it without looking both ways and listening for the traffic. The other one is to seek information from a variety of clues, a variety of sources, and piece that information, integrate it. And what you're doing is you're looking for the most meaningful information you can find. That's the information that's going to reduce your uncertainty. So let's say that you're standing on the edge of a steep snow-filled slope. Picture that you have a big circle, and within that circle is all of the information available to you. One of those pieces of information might be the temperature outside is 12 degrees. Well, if I tell you that, you're going to say, great. What does that do? What does that tell me about whether or not this slope is safe to ski? Now, another information, if I draw another circle and I say, oh, there have been north winds blowing and there's a foot of powder on the ground, and you're on a southerly slope. Well, maybe that slope is loading. That information might come from the middle of the circle. Now, if you're standing on the edge of that steep snow-filled slope and all of a sudden the slope goes, harumph, and a sister path right next to that one releases to the ground right in front of you, well, that tells you a lot to eliminate your uncertainty. And what you're doing, this is called the bullseye approach, and what you're trying to do when you're seeking information in the backcountry is go for the bullseye. Go for the information that's going to let you know whether or not that slope is safe. Clues include avalanche activity on similar slopes and similar aspects. It might be a rumphing noise, which is a collapse of a weak layer. It might be a hollow sound telling you there's some kind of weaker, less dense layer underneath. It might be a shooting crack telling you that the snow is capable of storing elastic energy, of propagating fractures. You're not going to necessarily have all those clues at once, but you'll have some combination. And you're also asking, is the weather contributing to instability? And the big three weather factors are temperature, wind, and precipitation. And of those, precipitation and wind are probably the major ones.
Any rapid change in the mechanical or thermal energy state of the snowpack is a precursor of avalanching. If the snow just sits there and nothing's happening, nothing is apt to happen. But as soon as you get deposition of a new layer of snow, or either by wind drift or by precipitation, a rapid change in the temperature of the snowpack at temperatures below freezing. I emphasize rapid. And if you look at the forecast, the occurrence of avalanches, again and again, you see that they're preceded by some sort of a rapid change in the energy state of the snowpack. Probably the key question for snow stability in respect to temperature is it above or below freezing? If it's above freezing, you're dealing with wet snow conditions, and you have a whole different pattern of snow avalanche release than if you're dealing with cold snow.
Wet snow is fascinating. We have a lot of rain on snow events that can close our mountain passes for days at a time, and those are so obvious that you wouldn't even be in the backcountry. So you can't even get to the backcountry because it's closed by avalanches.
With a lot of the topography on Mount McKinley, you have these phenomenal ice or solar bowls which have nothing but white snow rising up for thousands of feet, radiating itself onto a center area. If you're getting on steep snow and you're post-holing up to your butt and it's very wet in these solar areas, you're out of line. You shouldn't be there. You know, you should be there when the temperatures are cold and it's fairly stable.
Although signs of instability in weather conditions give important clues about snow stability, often the most important information comes from the active tests you can perform on the snowpack.
Test it out. If you're, zigzagging up a slope, be sure to kick some snow off if you can, or if you find a snow-covered stump or a little rock outcrop that gives a little extra steepness to the slope that's in a safe place, ski into it, take a big jump on it, and see if you can get things to trigger.
There's something that gives you a very quick indication of snow stability, and that's a little ski pole test where you poke your ski pole down into the snowpack and it will tell you the hardness of the different layers of snow. The little armpit snow tests, or just scooping with your hands to see what the different layers are like, I would do them several times at the beginning of the run. Anytime I stop, just about it's an automatic reaction to sit there and poke the snow. You may think you have a nervous twitch or something, but anytime you're on a new aspect, a new elevation, you would definitely do every little thing that you can to see what the snow stability is.
And welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the avalanche segment and it wasn't too much of a tease for those snow lovers here in South Central Alaska. For Wednesday's marine forecast over southeast Alaska, expect northerly winds at small craft level, 25 knots for Lynn Canal, and seas will be about 5 feet. Same conditions there as you get towards Chatham Strait, and then towards Clarence we'll switch to the easterly direction, 30 knots and 4-foot seas. Out over the open waters, expect anywhere from 15 to 25 knots out of the east and seas about 9 feet. Now on Thursday, we'll continue to see that north to northeast wind at about 25 knots for the northern portion of the inner passageways, still easterly at 25 knots and seas generally 5 feet for the inner passageways. Starting to crank it up a little bit though over the open waters, now southeast to northeast winds, 30 knots, and seas also will be on the rise from 8 to 14 feet over the southern portions. For South Central, expect fairly calm conditions for Wednesday's marine forecast. Just 10 knots for the northern portions of Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound out of the northeast and northwest respectively. 2-foot seas. As you get over the open waters, north to northeast and eventually easterly winds towards Kodiak Island, and expect winds about 15 to 20 knots and seas generally about 8 feet. And then over the southern portion of Cook Inlet down into Shelikof, 20 to 25 knots out of the northeast, 5 to 6 foot seas. For Thursday, can again expect mainly northeast to northerly winds throughout much of the area, 10 to 25 knots predominantly, and the highest seas are going to be where the fetch is the longest, where those winds have the longest chance to act, just east of Kodiak Island there at 10 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula, expect predominantly easterly flow again, coming off the mainland there around that area of high pressure, and 20 to 25 knots, seas 3 to 5 feet north of the peninsula, and south of the peninsula 9 to 11 feet on Wednesday. Northeast winds will become the predominant force on Thursday and expect 20 to 25 knots. North of the peninsula, 3 to 5 foot seas, and 11 to 12 south of the peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands on Wednesday, expect mainly southeast winds around that area of low pressure, becoming more southwesterly, and then eventually around the area of low pressure becoming northerly, and anywhere between 15 and 30 knots. Seas a little bit higher on the southern side of the islands at about 7 to 10 feet, and then about 8 to 9 feet for the northern side, and about 13 feet as you get towards the western Aleutians with a little bit longer fetch. And then everybody becomes mostly easterly except for Nikolsky. They'll stay out of the northeast, but 20 to 15 knots predominantly, and seas about the same as Wednesday with 6 to 8 feet north of the islands and about 13 to 15 feet for the southern portion of the Pacific side. As we look towards the west coast of Alaska on Wednesday, a little bit more variable winds around the low pressure to the south and high pressure over southern and southwest Alaska, anywhere between 20 and 30 knots, and seas generally the highest towards the open waters down by the Pribilof Islands at 10 feet. Some freezing spray is possible off the ice edge near St. Matthew Island. And then on Thursday, expect northeast to easterly winds, still some freezing spray out there, and 20 to 25 knots, seas generally between 4 and 8 feet. For the Arctic coast, expect easterly, becoming northeast, and eventually northerly winds wrapping around the mainland there. 20 knots becoming as low as 10 knots just off the point there of Cape Lisburne. And then on Thursday, similar conditions, easterly winds north of the Arctic coast, 20 to 25 knots, and then starting to taper off a little bit as we go more northerly on the northwestern portion of the state at 15 knots. So let's recap tonight's weather. We do have an area of high pressure that's going to build in over the southern portion of the mainland, producing some patchy fog in the Cook Inlet regions and near open waters. And we just have our area of low pressure out over the southwest portion of the Aleutian Range, and with that we'll have some light rain and snow mix. And our areas of blowing snow and patchy fog will reduce visibility along the Arctic coast as easterly flow remains intact. Again, high pressure and control for Wednesday as clouds will burn off and some outflow gusty winds into the Gulf of Alaska. Our area of low pressure continues to spin out over the Aleutians, and some patchy fog and pockets of snow showers will remain over the north coast as a few weak systems try to make their way up into the Gulf on Thursday. Have a great night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.